I can still hear the bells. They weren't ringing for mass. They were ringing because the walls were breaking. The basilica was shaking under the weight of voices. Prayers screamed, torn apart by gunfire. The marble floor glistened with blood, black under the crimson light. I remember the air, suffocating, heavy. It stank of sulfur and iron. My lungs burned every time I tried to breathe. One of my men fell to his knees beside me, clawing at the tiles as the chains dragged him back. He screamed my name. "God, no, don't leave me here, please!" I reached out, but the light split us. His hands were gone, his body swallowed into the dark. The last thing I heard was bone snapping, then silence. And in that silence, something laughed. It wasn't human. It wasn't holy. The sound came from everywhere at once, like a choir mocking itself. My rifle trembled in my grip. I forced myself to face it. The figure stood at the altar, fire bleeding from the cracks in its skin. The crucifix above burned red, as if the stone itself was alive. Its eyes locked on me. It could have killed me right there, but it didn't. I shouted through the ringing in my ears. "You think this is justice? Tell me what the hell you really are." It tilted its head, almost curious. Then the laughter came again, lower, crueler. "You fight for liars in holy robes, and still dare call me evil." The words cut deeper than the sound of gunfire. I wanted to believe it was a trick, but even then, I felt it. The hesitation, the fracture in my faith. The smoke rose higher, blotting out the dome. My men fired blind, their voices hoarse with prayers. "Dominus, libera nos." Over and over until it became meaningless noise. I stood frozen, hands clenched, asking myself if I was already damned for even listening. And now that I'm alive to say this, I can admit the truth. I wasn't afraid of the demon. I was afraid it might be right. Before that night, I thought I knew who the enemy was. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. Before it came to this, I need to tell you how it started. I was in D.C. when the orders came through. Another mission, another sealed folder passed across a table under fluorescent lights. The room smelled of stale coffee and stress. I told myself it was just another escort assignment, nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. The name on the folder was Daniel Hayes, a U.S. envoy, high-ranking enough that we were being flown across the Atlantic to make sure he survived a handshake tour at the Vatican. I had 5 men under my command. I told myself we'd be in and out, and that would be it. They briefed us quickly. Maps of Vatican City projected against the wall, lines of entry, fallback positions, secure hotels, convoys. It all looked clean, neat, professional. But I'd done this long enough to know nothing ever stayed neat. "Your team leaves at 6 a.m. Objective is clear. Keep the principal safe, no exceptions," I replied. "Understood, sir." Tyler Briggs was my second, solid, dependable. He never wasted words. He was the kind of man who would keep the line no matter what hit him. He simply nodded when the orders were given. That was Briggs. Cole Matthews was restless, shifting in his chair, his jaw tight. The muscle of the group. "We're flying halfway around the world just to babysit a politician? Great use of resources." That was Cole, always louder than he needed to be. But when it came time to fight, he was the first one through the door. Sean Keller was older, shoulders bent from too many deployments. A cigarette burned between his fingers even though it was forbidden in the briefing room. He exhaled smoke slowly, staring at the map like it was lying to him. Every mission looks simple until it isn't. He'd seen enough to know better than to trust a clean briefing. And Dalton. Eric Dalton. Too young, too green. He clicked his pen until I thought Briggs might break it in half. "Sir, what's the actual threat level?" he asked. His voice cracked slightly. I told him it was low, but I knew even then that protocol always fails. It always does. We flew out that night. Hayes slept most of the flight, oblivious. We didn't. Briggs read through the mission file until his eyes were bloodshot. Matthews paced the aisle like a caged dog. Keller stared at the dark window, smoke curling around him. Dalton asked too many questions, most of which I didn't answer. When we landed in Rome, the air felt different. Heavier somehow. The convoy rolled past monuments older than our entire nation. Tourists crowded the streets, but when the gates of Vatican City opened, the noise of the city died behind us. It was like stepping into another time. Inside the Apostolic Palace, marble swallowed our footsteps. Candles burned, though the sun was still high. Incense choked the corridors. The place smelled like prayers layered over centuries. That's where we met him. Cardinal Victor Andros. Crimson robe, cross heavy on his chest, face carved with lines of power. He didn't look at Hayes when he spoke. His eyes moved past him, landing on me and my men as if measuring us. Welcome to the Holy See. May your steps here be guided. Hayes smiled, all polished diplomacy. We're honored, Your Eminence. Behind the cardinal stood Father Gabriel Rossi, younger, quieter. His eyes carried something the others didn't. Doubt, or maybe sorrow. He whispered a prayer under his breath as we passed, the words barely audible. And further down the corridor, Sister Elena Marlowe. She wasn't part of the formal welcome. She stood half hidden by a column, staring straight at me. Her voice was low, urgent when she spoke. Stay vigilant. There are rules here that are older than any of us. Matthews muttered, shaking his head. What the hell's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer, because something in her face told me she wasn't joking. It wasn't theater. It was warning. The rest was ceremony. Latin chants, polished smiles, endless handshakes. We stood on guard while Hayes spoke politics no one cared about. My men shifted their weight, restless in the silence. Later, a Vatican officer guided us toward restricted corridors. His voice was flat as he laid out the rules. 5 of them. Just words, just superstition. Or so I thought. 1. Do not enter alone. 2. Do not recite prayers outside the approved rite. 3. Do not touch the seals. 4. Do not respond to any voice you hear in the dark. 5. Leave before the night bells sound. Dalton frowned, whispering to me. Sir, is he serious? Matthew scoffed under his breath. Sounds like ghost stories for tourists. Keller's cigarette glowed in the dim light. Rules like that exist for a reason. Someone broke them once. I told myself it was nothing, just old superstition dressed in Latin. But even as I thought it, I felt the weight of the words pressing into the air around us. That evening we crossed the Vatican gardens. The sun was setting, and dark clouds rolled in from nowhere. The bells began to toll, long and heavy. My men were quiet. Even Matthews kept his mouth shut. I told myself it was just weather, just a place. But in my chest, something was tightening, as if the walls of the city were already closing around us. I told myself it was only another assignment, but deep down, I knew better. I knew something had already begun. The days in Vatican City blurred into ritual and protocol. Security sweeps, layered perimeters, endless walkthroughs of routes we already knew by heart. My men carried themselves with discipline, but I could see the boredom sharpening into irritation. That was the danger with assignments that felt easy. Boredom eats focus, and in a place like this, the smallest lapse could open the door to something we didn't understand. We were shown through the Apostolic Palace more than once, guided by officials who spoke with smiles that never touched their eyes. They repeated details about which corridors were restricted, which gates were locked, which times were sacred. The words all sounded official, but there was something hollow behind them, as if they were rehearsed lines in a play. Keller caught my eye once when the official droned on, and he shook his head. He'd heard lies dressed as orders before. One evening, Andras himself returned to check on our presence. He carried himself like a man carved from stone, robes whispering across the floor. His voice carried the weight of command even though we weren't his men. "You will remain in assigned quarters when the bells strike. You will not roam the halls at night. The city is ancient, and certain places are not for you." Briggs straightened, answered with the precision of a soldier. "Understood, Your Eminence." I kept my eyes on Andras as he turned to leave. The man exuded control, but beneath it I felt something colder. Authority hiding fear. That night, I wrote notes into my field book. Nothing detailed, just impressions. The Vatican feels more like a fortress than a sanctuary. The silence is staged. The rules are alive. Matthews grew restless. He cleaned his rifle 3 times in one day. "We're wasting time. This place isn't dangerous. It's just a city of priests." He spat the last word like it was an insult. Dalton avoided his gaze, but I could see the rookie's unease deepening. Dalton cornered me later in the corridor. His voice was low, shaking. "Sir, I hear things at night. Like someone praying. But it's not in English, not Latin either. It's wrong." I told him to keep his focus, but the truth was I'd heard it too. A faint murmur in the stone when the lights went dim, like the walls themselves whispered after dark. The Vatican gardens became our escape during daylight hours. From there, you could see the dome of St. Peter's rising into the sky. Perfect and monumental. Tourists snapped photos from afar, never knowing how much of the place was closed to them. Beyond the hedges and fountains, locked gates barred the way to underground corridors. Guards watched the gates without speaking, their faces unreadable. Sister Elena found us once in the gardens. She moved quietly, but her eyes carried urgency. "You must remember the rules. They aren't stories. They are warnings. Do not let your men forget." Matthews rolled his eyes, but Keller leaned closer to me after she walked away. "That woman's seen something. She isn't making it up." I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to believe this was still about politics, about ceremony. But the weight in the air grew thicker each day. Even Briggs, who never complained, admitted the silence at night felt unnatural. The bells tolled on schedule, long and hollow, but when the sound faded, the city seemed to hold its breath. On the 3rd night, I woke to find Dalton sitting upright, staring at the door. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "It called my name. I swear it called my name." I told him to sleep. I told him it was just nerves. But when I lay back down, my own heart refused to slow. Because I knew. I knew the voice hadn't been his imagination. I'd heard it too, just outside the range of waking thought. A voice in the dark, waiting for us to answer. We were there to protect a man of politics, but each passing day made it clear. Our mission was never about him. It was about something buried beneath these stones, something they feared more than us, more than exposure, more than God himself. It began in the gardens. The Vatican gardens were supposed to be quiet, a retreat from the marble corridors and endless ceremony. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, fountains whispered into shallow pools, and the shadow of the dome stretched long across the gravel paths. But that morning, the calm cracked, and what we found there ended any illusion that this mission was routine. A gardener had been the first to stumble on it. By the time we arrived, 2 Swiss guards were standing, stiff, pale, under their helmets. They didn't speak. They didn't move closer either. They just kept their eyes on the body. It lay slumped against the stone wall near a hedge of roses. The man was dressed plainly, a citizen, not clergy. His clothes were torn, but there was no blood. His skin was gray, shriveled, as though every drop of moisture had been drained. His mouth was frozen wide, a silent scream carved into his face. And his eyes, white, glazed, staring without seeing. Dalton stopped dead when he saw it. His breath caught in his throat. Holy shit, this isn't real. Matthews moved forward, boots grinding the gravel. What the hell could do that? Keller knelt, studying the body with the cold detachment of a man who'd seen too much already. Not a weapon I know, not natural. I told myself there had to be an explanation, some chemical, some disease, something we could file under hazard and move past. But the smell of the body, it wasn't rot. It was sulfur, faint but sharp, biting the air. That's when the bells rang. Not the scheduled bells. These were faster, relentless. Alarm. The guards exchanged frantic looks. One of them broke formation, running to us. A demon has broken the seal. The city is locked down. No one leaves. Matthews cursed under his breath. Briggs just adjusted his grip on the rifle, steady as ever. Dalton looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for denial. But there was nothing I could say. The words hung in the air, ancient and terrible. A demon. A seal. They believed it, and I was beginning to believe it too. They herded us quickly through corridors I hadn't seen before, down into the stone beneath the Basilica. Torches burned in iron brackets, their flames swaying, but something was wrong. The flames bent inward, drawn against the draft, moving where no wind should have been. I tried to dismiss it, but the air thickened as we descended, heavy, as if pressing us back. The necropolis was a city of the dead. Narrow stone passages lined with tombs, inscriptions in Latin fading under centuries of dust. The sound of our boots echoed too loud, as though the walls swallowed and returned it wrong. Candles had been lit, dozens of them, but their glow flickered in reverse, shadows bending the wrong way. Dalton froze again, pointing at a cracked mirror set into the wall. In its reflection, we were 5 men, but only 4 stood in the hall. "Sir, do you see that?" I told him it was a trick, a flaw in the glass. But the truth was I saw it too, and the one missing was me. Chants rolled through the tunnels, not from our escort, not from the priests guiding us. This came from deeper in, vibrating through the stone. It wasn't Latin I knew. It wasn't human. The rhythm twisted my stomach, like hearing a song played backward, wrong. Matthew swore again, gripping his rifle tight. "We shouldn't be down here." Keller gave a hollow laugh, dry as dust. "Doesn't matter what we should be, we're already here." We reached a chamber at the end of a corridor. The air stank of ash and iron. Chains hung from the walls, old and blackened, links melted into stone. A circle carved into the floor glowed faintly, sigils etched deep, pulsing as though with breath. I knew then this was the seal they spoke of. The guards formed a perimeter, weapons ready. Our Vatican escort whispered fast prayers. Briggs kept his eyes forward, calm, unshaken. Matthews muttered curses. Dalton shook so hard I thought his rifle might clatter to the floor. Then the light in the chamber shifted. Shadows thickened until the torches looked like dying stars. And from the far corner, where the stone cracked open, it came. The figure was tall, shrouded in fire that bled through the seams of its skin. Its face was human only in outline, but twisted, wrong, as if carved by hands that had never seen a man before. Eyes burned red, fixed on us. Matthews raised his rifle, shouting. I moved too, instinct driving me. For a moment, I believed this was where we would die. But then, it stopped. It looked at me alone. The weight of its gaze rooted me where I stood. Its voice crawled across the stone, deep and endless. You're not my prey. And then it turned. In a blink, the shadows swallowed it whole. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. Dalton's breath broke in ragged gasps. Keller crossed himself, whispering words too low to catch. Matthews stared at the empty space, knuckles white. And me, I couldn't move. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't hunted. I was chosen. We didn't leave the chamber right away. No one dared move until the echo of that voice was gone. Even the guards, trained for obedience, stood frozen like statues. Their knuckles whitened around the grips of their spears, their lips pressed together in silent prayers. The silence stretched too long, too heavy. Finally, Andras's men pushed us onward. They didn't ask questions, didn't acknowledge what we'd just seen, as if silence itself would erase it. We walked deeper into the necropolis, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The air grew hotter, sulfur and ash filling our lungs. My throat burned with every breath. Dalton stumbled once, his foot catching the uneven stone. Briggs steadied him. The boy's face was pale, eyes wide, sweat dripping into his collar. "Sir, it looked right at you."
"Just you." I didn't answer, because he was right, and because I didn't know why. We passed another mirror, cracked and dusty. This time the reflection came late, a beat slower than our steps. My mouth was closed, but the image smiled. Cold. Deliberate. Matthews swore under his breath. "This place is hell." The priests led us into another hall, this one narrower, lined with niches holding bones. The skulls had been arranged into patterns centuries ago, mosaics of the dead. Their empty sockets glared at us. The candlelight danced across them, but the shadows moved wrong again, too fast, too sharp, like something alive. Keller's voice was low, almost reverent. People prayed here once, long before these walls were holy, maybe long before they were human. The chant came again, rolling through the stone, closer now, still backward, still wrong, as though syllables scraped against the world instead of shaping it. My chest tightened with each wave of sound. I knew if I listened too closely, I'd understand it. And I didn't want to understand. The guards quickened their pace. They were afraid too, though they wouldn't say it. Fear dripped from their movements, jerky, hurried, their eyes refusing to meet ours. Whatever they were leading us toward, they wanted it over quickly. At a junction, the torches all flared at once. A burst of fire climbed high, heat slamming against us. Dalton gasped, nearly dropping his rifle. In the blaze, for one heartbeat, I saw shapes moving on the walls, hands clawing, faces pressed from the other side of stone. When the fire shrank back, the walls were bare. Briggs leaned closer, his voice flat, steady, but I heard the tightness under it. "Eyes forward, don't break." We finally reached a heavy iron gate, symbols carved deep into its surface, filled with wax and ash. The priests unlocked it with shaking hands, fumbling their keys. Beyond was a stair spiraling downward into deeper dark. The air rising from below was cold, impossibly so. My breath fogged in the torchlight. We descended. Each step echoed louder than it should have, overlapping, as if unseen footsteps walked with us. The sound made my stomach turn. Dalton whispered to himself, rapid and broken, until Keller snapped at him to stop. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a crypt wider than the rest. Chains still lined the walls, but these were newer, reinforced with iron bolts and fresh welds. At the center stood another seal, cracked and scorched, the circle no longer complete. The guards recoiled as if the air burned their skin. One crossed himself quickly. "Domine, libera nos." Matthews raised his rifle, scanning the shadows. "If that thing's still down here, we finish it now." But the chamber was empty. Empty except for the sense that something had only just left. The ground still trembled faintly,
as though footsteps had shaken it seconds before. Briggs crouched, touched the stone carefully. He shook his head. Not cold, not warm. Wrong. I forced myself to look around, to process, to stay rational. I told myself there had to be explanations. Trick of light, chemicals in the air, mirrors placed for ritual effect. But even as I thought it, the words felt hollow. My mind tried to rationalize what my body already knew. The rules weren't superstition. They were survival. That was when the whisper touched my ear. Close. Too close, though no one stood beside me. Not pray. Not yet. I spun, rifle raised, but the chamber was empty. The torches flickered low, shadows recoiling from the circle on the floor. Dalton clutched my arm, trembling so hard he could barely stand. It spoke to you again, didn't it? I didn't answer. My silence was enough. That was the first time I saw it. And it chose not to kill me. I still don't know why, but every step we took back toward the surface, every prayer muttered by the guards, every look from my men, it all came back to the same question burning in my chest. Why me? Why not me? And what did it mean when a demon looked into my soul and said I wasn't prey? We were led deeper still, past corridors where even the guards hesitated to shine their torches. The stone was damp, sweating with moisture, though no water ran. The air thickened until it pressed against my lungs. I felt as though we were trespassing in the veins of something alive. The chamber we entered had no light but what we carried. Bones littered the floor, brittle, yellowed with age. At the center lay a body fresher than the rest. A priest's robes clung to him, torn and rotted, his hand frozen around a bundle of parchment. His lips were cracked open, as if he'd died mid-prayer. Briggs stepped forward, carefully prying the parchment from the corpse's grip. His voice was low. He held on to this until the end. The writing was old, the ink faded, but the words were legible enough. Keller read under his breath, his voice hollow in the silence. This is no demon. This is the scourge. It punishes the false. We bound it not to protect the faithful, but ourselves. Dalton shuddered, clutching his rifle like a lifeline. What does that mean? Bound it for what? Keller looked at me, eyes sunken. They sealed it not because it was evil, but because it threatened them. The liars. The ones who wear the cloth but spit on what it means. I wanted to deny it, to call it madness scratched on paper by a dying man. But the words carved into the walls told the same story, sigils repeated, warnings etched centuries ago. This place wasn't a prison for a monster. It was a cage for a witness. Then the air shifted. The corpse moved. His chest rose with a breath that wasn't his. His jaw cracked open. And when the voice came, it wasn't the man's. It was deeper, older, flowing like molten stone through the chamber. I spoke truth. They silenced me. The dead priest's eyes rolled back, glowing faint red. His lips moved with words that didn't belong to him. They feared me because I saw them. The ones who sold forgiveness for gold. The ones who raised the cross to hide their knives. I came to cleanse them. They chained me instead. Dalton backed away, nearly tripping over bones. It's in him. It's speaking through him. Matthews raised his rifle, eyes blazing. Enough! Whatever this thing is, it's twisting his body. It killed him already. But the voice pressed on, louder, filling every crack of stone.
I did not kill the faithful, I never have. Their deaths were lies told by those who profit from shadows. They sealed me because I named them. I named them, and they feared the truth. The echo rumbled through me, shaking conviction I thought unbreakable. I looked at the bones around us. Were they martyrs or executions? Keller spat to the side, shaking his head. God help us, maybe it's not the monster here. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. If it isn't evil, then who are we protecting? Briggs kept his rifle steady, but his jaw tightened. He didn't answer. None of us did. That's when the Vatican escort stepped forward, one of Andras's men. His voice cut through the chamber, sharp, final. It must be sealed again, no matter the cost. Dalton spun on him, eyes wide. Didn't you hear it? It's telling the truth! The officer's gaze burned cold. Truth or lie, it changes nothing. The seal is our command. It must hold. Matthews growled low, defiant. You just want it buried because it knows what you've done. The officer raised his torch higher, face stark in the light. If the seal breaks, Rome falls. If Rome falls, the world follows. That is all you need to know. The chamber cracked with silence. My men's eyes turned to me, some filled with fear, others with doubt, others with anger. We were splintering, fracturing under the weight of words that no bullet could silence. And for the first time, I felt my faith falter. Not faith in God, faith in men. Faith in the cloth they wore and the orders they gave. Because if the voice was right, then we weren't guardians. We were jailers. And maybe we had been serving the wrong master all along. The air in that chamber pressed down on us like a weight. No one spoke for a long time. The parchment in Briggs' hands trembled slightly, though his grip was firm. I knew he was steady as stone, but even stone can crack. The Vatican officer barked another order, his voice cold. Form the perimeter. Seal the chamber. Nothing leaves. Matthews spat onto the ground, defiant. Nothing leaves. We already saw it vanish into smoke. You think your chains and prayers can hold what fire couldn't? The guard's jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Keller lit another cigarette, hands shaking, though he tried to mask it. I've fought wars for men who lied. I buried friends for governments who never told the truth. But this feels older than lies, older than any nation, and worse. Dalton's voice cracked. Sir, we can't help them. This isn't our fight. We should get Hayes and leave. I wanted to agree, but leaving wasn't an option. The gates above had been sealed, soldiers ringed the walls. Vatican City itself was a locked box now. And we were trapped inside with something that wasn't supposed to exist. The voice returned then, not from the corpse, but from the walls themselves. It slid through the cracks like smoke. They silence because they fear. They kill because they are guilty. Dalton covered his ears, shaking violently. Matthews cursed. Keller dropped his cigarette onto the stone, crushing it under his boot with a trembling hand. Briggs just lifted his rifle slightly, eyes scanning, ready, though there was nothing to aim at. I tried to focus on the parchment, forcing my eyes over the words. They spoke of betrayal, of holy men who traded salvation for power, a priest confessing to cowardice, admitting they'd turned on their own to bind something they couldn't control. Not because it was evil, because it judged them. Andras himself entered then, robes whispering against the stone. His presence was heavier than the air, his eyes fierce with authority. You will ignore what you heard. This is corruption speaking, nothing more. The seal protects the world. That is the only truth that matters. Keller stepped forward, ash still clinging to his sleeve. Truth? That voice spoke more sense than any sermon I've heard tonight. Andras's face darkened. Blasphemy!
You dare take the word of a fiend over the word of God's church. I cut in before Keller could answer. What proof do you have it's a fiend? All I've seen is fear. Fear in your men, fear in your walls, fear in your own voice. The cardinal's gaze snapped to me, burning like coals. Be careful, soldier. Doubt is the crack through which damnation seeps. My chest tightened. I'd heard warnings like that before, from commanders who lied to hide their sins. I wasn't sure I could hear it again without breaking. The whisper returned, closer this time, curling around the torchlight. They called me demon to mask their sins. They chained me because I spoke their names. Would you chain the truth too? Dalton cried out, his voice breaking. Make it stop! Make it stop! Matthews grabbed him by the collar, shaking him hard. Pull yourself together! We don't get out alive if you break now. Briggs separated them, his voice calm, steady. Enough. We hold until we know more. We don't fracture. But we were already fractured. I could feel it. Each man standing in the same chamber, but on different ground. Keller leaning toward the voice, Matthews fighting to reject it, Dalton unraveling, Briggs holding discipline by threads, and me, caught between belief and doubt, faith and reason. The parchment slipped from my hands. The dead priest's face loomed in the shadows, lips still frozen mid-word. I couldn't shake the thought that he'd died not because he was weak, but because he tried to tell the truth, and that truth had been buried with him. Andras raised his hand, voice sharp as steel. Seal it again, tonight, before it rises, before Rome burns. One of his guards moved to obey, pulling chains, preparing rituals etched in Latin older than any we'd heard. The chamber glowed faint red from the sigils. The air grew hotter. My men looked at me, waiting for an order I didn't have. I should have told them to stand down. I should have told them to trust nothing here. But all I could whisper to myself was the same question over and over. If it isn't the evil one, then who is? And that was the moment my faith broke. Not in God, but in the men who spoke in His name. And I knew then that whatever came next, none of us would leave this city unchanged. St. Peter's Basilica had never felt like a sanctuary. That night, it became a battlefield. The bells rang madly as we were forced into formation. The nave glowed with thousands of candles, their flames flaring unnaturally high, shadows stretching across the vaulted ceilings. Priests stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting in Latin, their voices rising like a tide. Armed guards lined the marble aisles. Haze had already been moved away, hidden behind layers of walls and men. My team and I were pulled to the front, near the altar. We had no choice but to stand among them. Then the air split. The seal below had cracked open, wider than before, and from the fissures in the stone poured fire and smoke. The basilica shook, as if the ground itself was rejecting what was coming. And then the figure rose again, the same I had seen in the necropolis, but larger, brighter, more terrible. Fire bled from the seams of its skin, its voice echoing with fury. The priest screamed prayers, holy water splashing across the tiles. Guards raised rifles. The demon, no, the scourge, moved like storm wind, striking not at random, but with purpose. It tore through the first line of men, but it wasn't slaughter. It chose. Every blade, every burst of fire, fell only on those whose eyes carried fear and deceit, those who raised their crosses like weapons, but held greed behind them. They died first. Matthews fired without hesitation, bullets shattering against the creature's chest with sparks. "It bleeds like anything else!" he shouted. But I saw it. It wasn't bleeding. The fire only burned brighter where he struck. Keller crouched beside a pillar, already dragging Dalton into cover. Dalton was pale, his breath ragged. Briggs held the line with me, weapon steady, waiting for my order. But what order could I give? If we fired, we were siding with the liars. If we held, we'd be branded traitors. My men looked to me, but I had nothing. Only silence. The Basilica erupted into chaos. The demon roared, its voice shaking the dome.
I cleanse what you protect.
The words cut deeper than any weapon. Priests screamed louder, voices cracking, their prayers turning frantic. The smoke thickened, carrying the stench of sulfur and blood. Candles burst into fireballs, raining wax and flame down onto the crowd. Matthews broke cover, charging with a knife when his rifle emptied. He was reckless, but he was fearless. He drove the blade into the demon's side. For a moment, the light dimmed, and I thought he had done it. But then the scourge turned, its fire engulfing him. His scream cut through the Basilica. By the time it faded, there was nothing left but ash at my feet. Dalton collapsed to his knees, sobbing openly. "We can't fight this, sir! We can't!" Keller tried to drag him back, blood soaking his own shoulder. He'd been hit by debris when the ceiling cracked above us. "Get up, Dalton. Don't give it the satisfaction." Briggs shouted at me over the roar. "Orders, Leon! Now!" But there were no orders that made sense. Every instinct told me to fire, to fight. But another voice whispered inside me, low, curling like smoke. "Do not strike me. You are not prey." The Vatican guards surged forward, chains glowing with etched sigils. They hurled them over the demon, trying to bind its limbs. It thrashed, breaking half of them in seconds. But the numbers pressed on. Dozens of priests screamed verses, their throats raw, Latin ripping through the smoke. The scourge faltered under sheer weight, even as it tore men apart. The dome cracked, raining shards of marble. Fire roared from the altar itself. The crucifix above glowed red, almost molten, as if heaven itself burned. My ears rang with gunfire, screams, prayers. The line between the holy and the damned blurred in that chaos. All I knew was that Matthews was gone. Keller was bleeding. Dalton was broken. Briggs was steady. And I, God help me, I couldn't raise my rifle. The scourge collapsed under the chains, still roaring. "I cleanse what you protect. I burn what you shelter." Andras stood at the altar, his voice louder than the rest, veins bulging in his neck. "Seal it now! In God's name, seal it forever!" The priests screamed louder. The guards dragged the chains tighter. The Basilica shook as the light around the scourge cracked like glass. It let out one final roar, not of rage, but of sorrow. "You blind them all! You bind the truth!" And then the fire imploded inward. Light engulfed the hall, searing my eyes. When it cleared, the scourge was gone. Silence, smoke, blood. The Basilica stood, though barely. Bodies lined the marble. Ash floated in the air. Keller was slumped against the pillar, barely breathing. Dalton shook in Briggs's arms, still alive but shattered. Matthews was gone, nothing left but scorch marks. And me, I stood unburned, untouched. The fire had passed through me without harm, and in the ringing silence of my skull, I heard it. That voice again, deep inside, whispering as if from my own chest. "You did not strike me. I am with you now." The Basilica was theirs to claim a victory, to say they had destroyed the demon. But I knew better. It hadn't been destroyed. It had chosen a vessel, and that vessel was me. The battle didn't end with that flash of light. The Basilica was still trembling, as if the very stones carried the echo of what had been summoned inside. The chanting rose again, more desperate than before. Priests forcing their voices past cracked throats. Guards reloaded, their hands shaking though they tried to hide it. The smoke stung my eyes, and every breath carried the taste of iron and ash. Briggs dragged Dalton to his feet, shaking him hard. "You stand or you die here. Choose." Dalton nodded weakly, clutching his weapon like it might vanish if he let go. He was broken, but not yet gone. Keller pushed himself upright, blood running down his arm. He forced a grim smile through the pain. Still breathing. Not sure if that's mercy or curse. The scourge rose again, chains snapping one by one, its body writhing in fire. It let out a roar that rattled the windows high above, stained glass shattering into a storm of colored shards. The rain of glass cut into guards and priests alike. Some cried out to God, others cried out in terror. I just stared, frozen. Matthews was gone, his ashes scattered on the marble, and I felt the weight of his death crushing my chest. I'd led him here. I'd kept him under orders, and now his voice would never curse, never laugh, never complain again, only silence. The scourge lashed out, its fire carving arcs of red across the nave. Every man it struck twisted, withered, and fell. But I watched carefully. It never touched the innocent, the altar boys hiding under pews, the priests who dropped their weapons to pray instead of fight. No, it struck the ones who advanced with malice in their eyes, the ones whose voices rang too loud in false conviction. Briggs fired in short bursts, steady, controlled. The bullets sparked harmlessly, but his eyes stayed forward. He was holding the line, not because he believed in victory, but because standing down was worse. Dalton panicked again when the fire surged toward us. "We can't stay here! We'll burn alive!" Keller grabbed him by the collar, pulling him low. "Shut up and crawl, damn it! Noise gets you killed faster than fire!" The ground split beneath the altar. Cracks ran like veins through the marble, glowing red. The crucifix above the altar glowed brighter, molten light dripping down like tears. Andra stood before it, robes torn, his face twisted in fury. "In God's name, bind it! Bind it now!" Dozens of priests surged forward, chanting louder, throwing chains etched with sigils into the inferno. The scourge thrashed, fire flaring high enough to scorch the frescoes overhead. Its voice boomed again, a sound that shook my teeth. "You blind them all! You bind the truth!" I pressed my back against the pillar, torn between orders and conscience. Matthew's ashes clung to my boots. Dalton's eyes begged me for an answer. Keller's blood stained my hands. Briggs stood firm, waiting. Always waiting for me to decide. And still, I couldn't raise my weapon. The scourge stumbled as chains wrapped its limbs, glowing red-hot against its skin. It fell to one knee, fire dimming. For a moment, victory seemed near. The priests screamed their chants with everything left in them. Guards pressed forward with spears and rifles, forcing it back toward the circle carved into the stone. Dalton whimpered. "They're going to kill it, sir. They're going to kill it." I should have told him that was good, that it was justice. But the word stuck in my throat. Because I knew. It wasn't justice. It was fear, sealed in ritual. The scourge's gaze met mine one last time, even as chains crushed its frame. For an instant, the world slowed, the fire dimmed, and I heard its voice, not with my ears, but with my soul. "You see them. You know. You are mine now." The priests screamed the final words of their rite. The basilica erupted in light so bright I thought my skull would split. I dropped to my knees, blinded, ears ringing with 1,000 voices. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. When my vision cleared, the scourge was gone. Only smoke and chains remained, twisted into the floor. Bodies lay everywhere, burned, broken, silent. The basilica was half ruin, its beauty scarred by fire. Andras raised his arms, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "It is done! The seal holds!
Rome is safe.
Safe. The word tasted like poison. Briggs knelt beside Keller, pressing a bandage into his wound. Keller gritted his teeth, trying not to groan. Dalton sat slumped against a pillar, rocking, whispering fragments of prayers. Matthews was gone forever, and me? I was still standing, untouched, unburned. The fire had passed through me like air. And in the hollow silence of my chest, I heard it again, the voice, deeper now, not around me, but inside me. They think they've won. But I am not gone. I am with you. My hands trembled. I looked at them, expecting to see fire flicker between my fingers. But they were clean, only coated in ash and blood. Still, I felt the weight, the presence curling behind my ribs. They believed they had destroyed the demon, but I knew the truth. It hadn't been destroyed. It had chosen a vessel, and that vessel was me. We were flown out of Rome under silence. No press, no reports, no acknowledgement. The Basilica still smoked behind us when the jet lifted from the runway. Hayes slept again, oblivious, safe. He would return home with speeches and photographs, never knowing what had been burned into the stone beneath his feet. By the time we landed in Washington, the official story was already written. The Vatican released a statement, polished and clinical. An animal escaped the private menagerie near the gardens. Containment measures were taken immediately. There is no further threat. The word spread across every channel. Neat. Clean. A lie that erased the bodies, the fire, the chains. Matthews's name would never be spoken again. Hayes shook my hand at the airstrip. His grip was firm, practiced. You and your men performed admirably, Captain. The United States owes you its gratitude. Then he walked away, never glancing back at Keller's bandaged arm, or Dalton's 1,000-yard stare, or the empty space where Matthews should have been. I didn't speak. None of us did. Briggs only nodded once, eyes hollow. Keller's face was gray, his cigarette trembling. Dalton muttered prayers under his breath, words stumbling, lost. Back in D.C., the world moved on. Hayes made his appearances. Vatican smoke curled into the sky for the faithful. And me? I checked into the Willard, sat in the corner of the room, and listened to the silence. But the silence didn't last. The first whisper came at midnight. My name. Not loud, not harsh. Just there. As if spoken from the inside of my skull. I froze, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. The next night, it wasn't my name. It was another, a name I didn't know. And then the sound of weeping, faint, vanishing as soon as I sat upright in bed. The night after that, another name, and another. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it stirring, waiting. Not outside, inside, breathing with me. I walk the streets of Washington now, the weight of the Capitol pressing around me. Men in suits, women in heels, voices spilling lies over microphones and cameras. And sometimes, when one of them passes close, I feel the name whispered in my ear before I even hear it in the dark. The names are never random. They belong to those who wear masks of power, who profit from shadows. I know that now. Am I the warden of evil? Or its last soldier of justice? I don't know. I only know the fire didn't leave. It lives under my ribs. It waits for me to decide. And if you ever hear a name whispered in the dark, pray it isn't yours.